Preseason is over. Kansas City won the game against the Browns. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. Players that stood out to us, players that may end up playing in the NFL but on other teams. And then we're going to take some questions at the end. Matt Derrick is back with us today. Ryan is not going to be here, so it is just him and I, and he is at the field. We will be right back to talk about all that and more today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, Chiefs Kingdom, for another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Chiefs your first listen every day. Don't forget to go check out another team, or Locked On NFL has lots of shows talking about all the cutdowns across the NFL. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. There's a lot to talk about today when we start looking into this game. And if you want to be able to reach us in a little bit of a different way, hit us on the text line, 816-357-8781. A lot of texting going on, and I'm talking to a lot of different people on there, enjoying that, having a good time being able to talk to some different Chiefs fans. He is Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest. There is a ton to talk about today when we look at this game, but I want to tell you really quick about the title sponsor for today, which is Underdog Fantasy. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with the promo code Locked On to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Matt, how was your first day at Arrowhead?
It was a pretty good day overall. I don't think there was a lot of hiccups here in the stadium. Hopefully any of the fans that came out had a good time. I'm right now in the visiting radio booth, so I have the sunshine coming into the radio booth right now. So if I'm squinting a little bit, that's why. The sun is actually finally out a little bit. But this was a long and, I think you noted, wacky preseason finale. Yeah, I think we could have all done with a fewer injuries and penalties. This one dragged out for a bit.
It really did, and it was really the first half. I mean, the first quarter just seemed to go forever. And you're going to have that when you have penalties, when you have turnovers. And let's just jump in really quick right there. Shane Buechele was, trying to get the number 2 QB spot. Looked like he may end up being that guy. He struggled today, and his pick that he threw to his first pick was bad. I still think there was defensive pass interference there, but his first pick was bad.
Yeah, he's coming off a really good game last week, obviously, against the Cardinals. Everybody had a good week last week against the Cardinals. And this was Buechele's chance. I mean, he prepared this week essentially as the starter to a degree. I mean, Mahomes got all the reps with the one, so that was normal. But Buechele really got the be the guy that was getting all the reps. I mean, some reps with the ones, but all the reps as the number 2 quarterback, which he knew was going to be the starter today. So he kind of got to prepare for that. He even got to meet with the media this week. So, this was kind of his moment in the limelight and his chance to kind of be the audition as a, potential starting backup quarterback and not just the relief guy or the third guy on the team. And it didn't go the way he wanted to. I mean, there were certainly some moments where he struggled. There was a couple of, mistakes that were in there. He really struggled to me. And the part that was really, I think, concerning if, you're trying to win the number 2 quarterback job is that there were just some recognition and blitz recognition that he just didn't make. And those are mistakes that Blaine Gabbert doesn't. Blaine came in and he read those pretty well. I mean, Blaine wasn't perfect either, but he performed very well. 1 or 2 throws I know he'd like to have back, but like I said, it wasn't
the throw to Bushman. Yeah.
That could go either way. I mean, honestly, looking at it, you can say that the throw that Bushman dropped and bobbled was on the quarterback for being low and behind. I was kind of looking at it when I first saw it. I was like, well, I think it was more about Matt Bushman may have been just a little late to the ball and turning around and getting out of his route. So probably maybe you can point the fingers both directions, but ultimately it ends up on the quarterback stat sheet. But you look at the other plays and you look at the blitz recognition and you look at the way that he was just able to get out of certain problems. Gabbert's better at that than Buechele is right now. So I think Gabbert's going to end up being the number 2 quarterback. But then again, I don't think it matters that much because I think both these guys will be on the 53.
Yeah, and you make a great point. They're going to both be on the 53. I think we've talked about that pretty much since the first preseason game. Buechele came out and actually looked a lot better than I was expecting. And I do think he actually made it a competition with the way he was able to play in game 1 and game 2. Today he struggled, and that's going to happen. You look at other guys, it's, Cornell Powell, and I'm not going to say that I thought he had a chance to really make in this roster, but I really thought he had a chance at making another roster somewhere else. His drop that led to another interception for Buechele and, a penalty on a special teams play isn't really helping his case.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, his chance to make this roster would be pretty low, but he was campaigning for other teams. And honestly, I mean, he has put on good enough film this year that I think that there might be some teams that would take an interest in him, especially some of the Chiefs clones that are out there, either with former Reid assistants as head coaches or in coordinating positions or just emulating the Andy Reid offense. Hey, there's already some of those guys in Washington with Eric Bieniemy, and I'm sure that there's a few guys on this cut down list that they'll have their eye on. The Indianapolis Colts are always a team that has an eye on Chiefs cut downs. I would expect Jacksonville would probably be the same way. I mean, there's going to be some teams looking at this roster, and especially on the offensive side of the football. I mean, I think there's some receivers. I think there's some offensive linemen, running backs. There's guys up and all down this offensive roster that I think can play in the league this year.
Well, and you bring up a good point on running backs. P. Ryan, I think, has made his case for the roster. He looked great today. His run was great. His catch and his ability to break tackles, getting in the end zone, I think actually puts him on this roster. And it was kind of a question mark going in this game whether or not they keep 4 running backs. I still think they do, mainly because I don't think that they trust that Pacheco is fully back yet. He only had 1 carry and 1 play, I think, from what I saw today.
Yeah, I believe he just had the 1 touch. And yeah, I mean, that's a concern. I mean, I think you have to go into it. Now, what are the chances that your running backs are going to get taken on the waiver wire? To me, they're pretty low. I mean, unless somebody's got an injury and it's somebody that they're familiar with. Now, P. Ryan's one of those guys. So if he ends up on the waiver wire, if the Jets or the Dolphins, a team that he's been with in the past, see that maybe they need some depth, maybe they would be interested. But the running back position is just so devalued that it is easier to get those guys over onto the practice squad than it is some other positions. But P. Ryan has absolutely, I think, played himself into that position. Remember, Deneric Prince was the darling early of OTAs and training camp, and he just kind of hit a wall. And, I thought he did pretty well today. I mean, he looked better today than he has been. But I think that train is kind of left for now. I mean, Prince is absolutely a candidate for the practice squad. But P. Ryan has just been too good, especially the last couple of games. I think it's hard to leave him off the 53. I've had a real struggle with putting him on the 53 on my last roster projection. But the one I'm doing tonight, and they'll be up later at Chiefs Digest, he's going to be on it because I think he has just been too good. I think you have to recognize when guys have performed, and he's been one of those guys.
Yeah, and then when you start looking at the other side of the ball, you have all these different positions and it's questions. And after the game, Andy Reid did give us a little bit of an update, said that Tony could come back and actually practice next week. That was something that he said. And he also said Nick Jones didn't have to have surgery. So that actually leads me to a question for you. If Jones doesn't have to have surgery, which I thought he was going to have surgery, I was expecting him to be one of those guys that makes the initial roster and gets put on IR. Do you still see that as a case, or do you think he's going to be available early on in the season?
Yeah, I still think there's a strong chance that he starts the season on injured reserve, which in order to be returned, he will have to make the 53. Right. But, even though he doesn't require surgery, it's still a fracture that he's dealing with. So that is going to take some time to heal. And while corners can play through fractures, hand injuries like that, they do it all the time. I think that with Jones, I get the sense that they really want to make sure that he gets a chance to fully recover and not put him out there where he's participating at less than 100%. So I think they would rather take the chance of shutting him down for now, put him on IR. They've got other guys. I mean, that's one position that, they have some depth, although that depth is being challenged now without Jones, without Najee Johnson, and a question mark with L'Jarius Sneed too. And, and with some guys like Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams that have struggled at times during training camp. So there are some concerns there, even though they do have depth that they like. But I get the sense that they really don't want to push Nick Jones any further than they have to. So my expectation, he's still going to start on IR, but that's not set in stone.
Well, and I think the other thing that maybe makes it a little bit easier for a guy like Jones to be on IR is look what they've done with Shamari Connor. I mean, I know he's not a corner, he's a safety, but he's been playing up to the line of scrimmage, and I think playing a little bit of a role like what they would like Nick Jones to do at times. But Connor's been showing the ability to blitz. He's been showing that he can be the third safety on the field. That's huge for him, and I think that's going to be big things for the season.
Yeah, and the way they've been using Shamari Connor reminds me a lot of how they used Kendall Fuller in the second half of 2019,
Yep.
when essentially he was playing a safety. And, and yeah, he would play in the slot a lot, but that also allowed them back then, when you had Kendall Fuller and you had Tyrann Mathieu on two sides of the field, they could move those guys around and really match up with what the offense was doing. With Connor, they can kind of do the same thing. I mean, you've got Justin Reid on one side and Shamari Connor on the other, and some of these, I wouldn't have called them necessarily three safety sets, because some of them are just nickels where Shamari Connor is the nickel. So, I think it gives him a lot of flexibility, and he's performed well. We need to see more sample size. We need to see more work from him, because it's been a small amount of work, and maybe he'll get exposed. But so far, I think you have to like how it has looked so far, and that's one thing that circle back with this defense, and corner certainly fits that, but the defensive line especially, they're still figuring out what they have, especially without Chris Jones there, especially with the turnover and with the injuries. They don't have a firm grasp of what the rotation on the defensive line is going to be, and this game today was a great example of that. You had a guy like Chris Williams who was coming in and rotating with the ones from the very beginning, and he's also out there on the field at the end of the game with the threes. Danny Shelton is a guy that looks like he's a contender for the roster, but has never taken a snap with the ones. I mean, he's almost exclusively been with the twos. Keandre Coburn's going to make this team, but he and BJ Thompson, once again, mostly with the threes. So where this rotation is on the defensive line, it's a mystery. And I think that there's as many as 13 guys that could make this team from the defensive line, because the Chiefs just really don't know what they have yet.
Yeah, it's a huge question mark going into the regular season, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the defensive line. We're also going to talk about some players that I see people talking about in the comments, about guys that are probably going to make a roster somewhere else. Maybe Kansas City can get a trade for some of these guys, and that would be great for them, something to watch there. But I want to tell you about one of our newest sponsors over at Harry's. No matter why you shave, Harry's has you covered for the best shave of your life at a price you'll love. If it's you shave for your girlfriend and or your wife, got to keep the facial hair off. However you want to do it, Harry's has you covered. From the legendary high-quality razors to skin products like exfoliating face wash and hydrating lotion, Harry's gives you a premium shave without the premium price tag. Get better quality and a better price than other razors when you get Harry's delivered right to your door. The shave kit that I got was a starter set. It's a $13 value for just $3 at harrys.com/lockedonnfl. It includes a 5-blade German-engineered razor, weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and a travel cover. Check that out. It is fantastic. Harry's makes the skincare products that you will want, that will give you the best shave ever. Creams, washes, and lotions that will help you keep your skin healthy and hydrated. Sleek, ergonomic, weighted handles that look great in your bathroom and give you precise control with each swipe. Get your best shave ever this summer with Harry's razors and skincare products. Get a $13 starter set for just $3 at harrys.com/NFL. That's harrys.com/NFL for a $3 starter set. All right, Matt. The guy, obviously, everybody's talking about that looks like he should be on the Chiefs roster just because of the way he shows up, but is probably going to be playing elsewhere. Ihmir Smith-Marsette, he looked good. I think I saw somebody say that he had the second most receiving yards in the preseason in the NFL. And while he looked good for Kansas City and he did well on returns for the most part, I just can't see him being on this roster. They've already got 7 guys.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, there's 7 players that have already, I think, proven that they deserve a spot on that roster and have made a case for that. So, it's going to be tough for Ihmir Smith-Marsette to crack that group. I mean, right now, if you're a Chiefs fan, you're looking at this roster, I'll tell you, based on the reps, based on the production, everything that we've seen during training camp and the preseason, Justin Ross is the number 7 receiver on this team. So when you're talking about Ihmir Smith-Marsette fitting in and where he's going to be, he would be next in line. So it'd be, which one do you want? You want Ihmir Smith-Marsette or Justin Ross? And I think that a lot of folks would probably say they still want Justin Ross. Yep. With a lot of the other guys, sometimes it's contract situation and sometimes it's performance and what they do. If you watch today's game, Richie James was making this team. He was out there with the ones, but that was it. They shut him down after that. Anybody that was in that first group with the first team and didn't come back on the field is absolutely making this team. And so Richie James is going to be the kick returner, the punt returner. So he's not going anywhere. Justin Watson is the only guy in this team that can play 3 different spots. And Andy Reid will tell you he's the best complementary route runner this team has. And by the way, he's got a lot of guaranteed money in his contract, so he's not going anywhere. That just makes it really, really difficult. So it's great that all these guys have played themselves in the position, but you're right. I mean, there's not a spot for Ihmir Smith-Marsette. He will have to go to waivers since he's got less than 4 years experience. And if it doesn't clear it and somebody else claims him, he's not coming back to the practice squad. I talked to him after the game, and he definitely wants to stay in Kansas City. That'd be his first choice. But if another team comes calling, I mean, he'll be gone.
I won't be surprised if somebody doesn't throw a late round pick for him, just because I think he played well enough during the preseason. And I don't know that you're going to get much past the Bears. It's the Bears. I mean, Ryan Poles is a guy that is a lot like Kansas City when it comes to the players that they like. So if you want him, you throw out a late round pick. It could be conditional. Who cares? He's not going to be on the roster in Kansas City. So I think that would be somebody you'd have to be looking to trade for. When you start looking at the rest of the team, I mean, you look at, the corner position, that's going to be a question as to who's going to be on this roster. But then you start looking also at offensive line. How many are you going to keep? They've got 4 tackles that they're going to need to keep. I can't imagine they keep 5. Do you see that being an issue?
Yeah, that one's going to be another difficult decision. And that's something where I would not be surprised if Brett Veach was looking to try and maybe make a trade and flip some of his depth on the offensive line, because you're right. I mean, you've got Donovan Smith and Juwan Taylor who are going to make this team. Wanya Morris is going to make this team, even though he's not ready to be the swing tackle yet. So you're going to keep a 4th, and that's going to be either Lucas Niang or Prince Tega Winogo. Honestly, I mean, both those guys have made a case, and they have been neck and neck all the way. I mean, based on what I've seen from just the snaps go, I would give the nod to Prince Tega Winogo because he's played more of left tackle than Lucas Niang has, but those guys have been so even. But you can flip one of those guys. I mean, those would be 2 guys certainly to look for in a trade possibly. And if you do that, it frees up a spot. I mean, it makes it a lot easier. I mean, so if you're not carrying 5 tackles, I mean, now you can bring a little bit more insurance on the interior, which you probably need because Nick Allegretti's banged up right now, and it's not 100% certain when he's going to be ready, which means you got to have a backup center. And so does that mean a Mike Caliendo or an Austin Ryder are in place? I mean, based on what I've seen from practice, I would say that the Chiefs are more prepared for Austin Ryder to be their 3rd center than Caliendo, but both those guys are in the mix. And again, I mean, maybe that's a trade situation, or maybe it's where you're looking around the league to see if there's another guy that you can pick up for the offensive line.
Yeah, and you're sitting there looking at different positions. Allegretti is going to be the 6th offensive lineman on this team. He's not going anywhere. I think it's Prince as well. I think that you're right in that. Wanya Morris, that gets you at 8. At that point, you're going to probably keep 9. I can't imagine they're going to keep 10 just because of the other positions on this roster, which is why I don't think they keep 5 offensive tackles. But who is your number 8 or who's your number 9 right now? Do you think it's Kennard over Caliendo? Because Caliendo gives you a little bit more ability to play the interior positions. Kennard could just really play guard, although he has played tackle at times as well.
Right. Kennard has guard tackle flexibility. Caliendo has center guard flexibility. Based on what I've seen from at least from snap counts and everything goes, I would say that Kennard has the advantage. He also has the contract advantage. He's got a little bit of dead money on his contract. Yep. Caliendo doesn't. I mean, he's basically free to waive and bring back to the practice squad if no one claims him. And I think there's a better chance of Caliendo clearing waivers than there would be Kennard. So, yeah, I mean, that factors in. And even if it's a close race, I mean, that's why I give the nod to Kennard there. But, once again, the backup center situation could play into it. So if you need to squeeze, a center onto the squad because Allegretti is not going to be ready, that factors into your roster construction. So it's a lot of difficult decisions there. And honestly, I mean, I think the Chiefs in the past, they've kept as many as 10 offensive linemen. I think in a dream scenario, I think they'd like to keep 10, but I think it's more likely that they're going to end up having to keep 9.
Well, and that's because of all the other positions that you have questions at. Wide receiver, they've never kept 7. I can't see that they're not going to keep 7 this year. You look at what Justin Ross was able to do, that touchdown grab that he had is something that they haven't had on their team. The ability for somebody to be that big body in the end zone and give them the fade opportunity. I think that's a great sign for him. And Brett Veach, and I'm sure you were watching the game actually live in Arrowhead, so you probably didn't see Brett Veach talking in the second quarter and said that, they're looking forward to seeing what Ross can do this year. So I think he's on the roster, at least where he's coming from. Then you start looking at other positions. You talked about defensive line earlier. That's a big question mark. Amenahue looked good at times, but he's gone for 6 games. Chris Jones isn't here, and I know a lot of people are talking about him in the chat, so I want to address that really quick. If he doesn't show up, can you tell people what's going to happen if he doesn't show up for week 1?
Yeah, most likely if Chris does not show up before Tuesday when the final cut down to the 53 players, the Chiefs will most likely put him on the did not report list. And what that does is it removes him from the active roster, so he won't count against the 53. And it also removes his cap number, his salary for this year, that $19.5 million off the books. So it doesn't take everything. It doesn't take away the dead cap money that he'd be appointed for the team, but it would take off his base salary, at least as long as he's on that did not report list. Of course, after Tuesday, he could still, once again, show up at any time, whether he signs a new deal or not. So that would be a complication further down the road when he does return. But, at least in the short term, if he doesn't show up on Tuesday, expect that they do put him on that did not report list. And that would be the next step. Now, we've got, basically 72 hours, a little bit less than 72 hours until that cut down. You could still get a deal. And if Chris Jones does get a deal done and comes in, that's a whole other equation. And it would make the Chiefs' life incredibly easier. Although you would then still have the consideration about how much he can play and how much he'd be ready to go in week 1.
Well, and the nice thing is they can make the move on Tuesday, so they don't have to keep him on the roster to make it on a Wednesday type move. So that actually helps a little bit if he does not show up. I would expect he's not going to be there, so I would expect that's probably going to be the move. But who knows at this point if he's going to be there or not. But there's still a lot of other questions. Amenahue's another one that will be moved to the suspension list on Tuesday, so he's not going to count against the top 53 and doesn't have to be held on till Wednesday. Then you start looking at other guys that maybe could make the roster, like a guy like Danny Shelton, who I think could actually make this roster, but he may not be on the roster on Tuesday. It's one of those guys, and Blake Bell's the other one, at least one of the other ones that is possible. He's not going to be on the roster because if they cut him, they can easily bring them back, and they're not going to count against the first 53, but then they can move players to the IR. And that, I think, is something that they're going to be watching. I think that's going to affect how these things are going to play out on both the offensive line and defensive line.
Yeah, and the Blake Bell situation is pretty unique because that may very well be the surprise cut that you were looking at the Chiefs roster on Tuesday and you only see 2 tight ends. Don't be surprised because Blake Bell and Danny Shelton, as you noted, both basically the 2 veterans with 4 more years of experience, which means they don't have to be put on waivers, that any team can claim them. They've got the 2 contracts that are easiest to do that with because they don't have any guaranteed money and they're both basically minimum salary deals. So wouldn't surprise me, at least in Bell is one of those cuts for one day and then comes back on Wednesday. Shelton's a different case because Shelton's probably right on the bubble about whether or not he makes this roster. And last year he was on the practice squad. So he could very well once again end up on the practice squad and be in that position. Remember, they didn't even elevate him last year. So we're talking about him now maybe being in the conversation for making this roster, which, I think you can make the case, even though, Danny Shelton told us that he's been remotivated and he's lost a little bit of weight. I think there's actually a concern that if Danny Shelton wasn't good enough to make this roster last year, and now he is good enough, does that mean your defensive tackle group has taken a step back? Without Chris Jones there, it absolutely has taken a step back, but it's just how big of a step is it taking? They got a lot of questions because Turk Wharton started today. He has been out most of training camp with, that knee that he's rehabbing and bringing back from the ACL. Don't know that he's necessarily 100% and ready to play a full workload yet. So there's some questions there. And like a Keandre Coburn, I think is going to be a good guy down the road. But once again, it does not appear to be ready to be in the top of the rotation right now. He's going to be a back-end guy. Maybe a guy who's not even active on game day in the first half of the season.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about when you start looking at the different players. We're going to get into that a little bit more this week. Ryan and I will get into it on Monday's show. We'll be back on that to talk about that. We're going to take some of your questions here after I tell you about our friends over at Underdog Fantasy Football. August is here, and you know what that means. The official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out best ball on Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft. No waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. Try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back and even bigger, with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so do not wait around. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. Man, there's so much to talk about. We could talk about this roster for hours, I would imagine, just because of all the different players we've got on it. But let's go ahead and get into the questions that we've gotten throughout this show. And let's just start here. Even with the drama, does this year's defense have more hope than the 2018 defense? I personally think so. I think that if Jones shows up, when he shows up and he's ready to play football, I think this defense actually looks really good.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely. I mean, compared to 2018, yeah. I mean, I don't think this defense is going to be in the same conversation with that. I mean, this team wants to be a top 10 defense. Are they there yet? That's going to be the question. I mean, and some of it's going to depend on Chris Jones. I mean, a lot of it is going to depend on just how much production they're able to get from that front four. Right now, we're only seeing them get some production as far as getting after the quarterback with some blitzing. And at some point, you're going to have to win some matchups with, rushing 4 and rushing 5 guys and not, bringing in, a 6th or a 7th blitzer. So that's where I think the struggle is going to be. I mean, it's also going to be about just guys staying healthy. But I mean, I think that this team is better in the middle of the field than it has been in the past, as far as the linebacker core, and Nick Bolton is becoming a Pro Bowl caliber player. I think they're better at safety. The fact that Justin Reid's more comfortable this year, I think there's a lot of upside. Can they be as good as they hope that they are? I don't know. I've got some questions. They need to show me, but no, there's definitely talent on this team.
I love how you bring up kicker too. Thank you so much for that, Matt. I appreciate it. With Justin Reid.
There you go.
Who do you think you will get cut? Matt and I are actually both going to have roster predictions. Matt sounds like he's going to have his up. I think I'll have mine up as well. Unfortunately, there's just too many players to name at this point. You're cutting down, almost 40 players, and then you're going to be looking at practice squad. I think that the Chiefs will probably start. I'd be surprised if they're not cutting players by Sunday or Monday.
Yeah, it can happen pretty quickly, especially because of the way that the waiver wire falls this year and the way it's structured. Players who go on waivers, after today's games and starting on Sunday will be on waivers until Wednesday morning. So you can, placing a player on waivers early is kind of akin to, just announcing that they're available for a trade. So, if you place a player on waivers early, you might do that in a case where you're just wanting to send up a smoke signal to all 31 teams without making some phone calls that, hey, this guy's available for a trade if you're interested.
Amir Smith-Marset, there you go. I do not have my final 53 set yet. I got it pretty close. I think I have probably 51 or 52 players figured out. I'm going to have to look at it just after this game. But I do think that it's pretty set at this point. Matt, the big question is, did Amir Smith-Marset overtake Richie James or someone else?
I mean, he's been as good as he's been. I'd like to say that he has, but I just don't see it. I mean, like I said earlier, some of it's contract situation, some of it's just upside, some of it's who you've drafted. Has he been better than some other guys? Yeah, but he's not going to displace Rashee Rice on the 53. He's not going to displace Richie James. Justin Ross, like I said, I mean, as good as Justin Ross has been right now, he's the 7th guy in the rotation. Is that the guy that you want to keep over Amir Smith-Marset? I mean, I know other names will get thrown out there like Justin Watson, but again, there's so many reasons why the Chiefs are keeping Justin Watson, and the fact that he went into the starting lineup and taking Kadarius Toney's place tells you a lot about how the Chiefs feel about him. So I think that answers a lot of the questions for me. It's tough for Amir because this is just a bad situation for him to be in, but he's made the most of it. And like I said, I talked to him after the game, and he said he's done everything that he can, and he's made a compelling case. He's done exactly what Andy Reid says you have to do: make it difficult for this team to cut you, and make it easy for somebody else to pick you up. And Smith-Marset has done that.
I didn't think he had a chance to make the roster going into this game, or actually going into the into the offseason. But what I love is you're absolutely right. That's what he's done. He's made it hard for the team to cut him. And he, you said he wants to stay in Kansas City. Maybe he's going to get the chance. I just have a feeling that somebody's going to take a chance on him because of what he showed, just because I think he can be that guy. But when you look at Kansas City's receiver core, you have a lot of questions going into 24. If he sticks on the practice squad or they have injuries, that's possible that he could stay in Kansas City and help the team long term. Now, I'm going to do 2 questions on this one because they're talking about the same person, I believe. What about Rice and having the drops? And are you concerned with the drops? I will say really quick, I am a little concerned about him. They're concentration drops in my opinion. I think that I have seen him, try to catch the ball while looking away before he gets hit, trying to figure out where he's going the next at times. But the one where it was a deep pass, that's a concentration drop. I mean, you can't drop that ball.
Yeah, that's the only concern I really have with it is just that at this point it's becoming a mental thing and not a physical thing. That especially a drop like that's a bad one. And he had a couple of bad ones today, and I thought it was pretty notable. I mean, they seemed like they came out and went to him right off the bat in the first play of the second half, and I felt like that was maybe a little bit intentional to try and see if they couldn't get him on a little bit of a run. But I mean, do I have long-term concerns? No. I mean, this hasn't been a problem for him. He's a rookie. It's somewhat normal for rookies to have that. So it's not a long-term concern for me. But as far as the short-term concern for this being a mental block with him, yeah, I mean, I think you want to see him snap out of it as quickly as you can.
Yeah, and I really wish that they would have gone back to him in the second quarter after that big drop. I wish that Gabbert would have gone right back to him the next drive. And they ended up getting him involved in the third quarter, so I think that really helps. There's a lot of questions about Chris Jones, so let's just jump on a couple of them. Jones implications, which we'll talk about in just a second, Mac. Can we trade him off the did not report list? Technically, I believe you can. I don't think that's going to keep them from being able to trade him. And then, so if they place Chris Jones on the DNR list, they free up money to sign practice squad players and IR and all that. Is that correct? And from my understanding, that is correct. If that comes off, they can use that money to do the practice squad. They can use that money to do whatever they need to do. There are still moves that can be made that would free up money other than Chris Jones. But if they don't do it by Tuesday and Jones doesn't report, they've got roster space or they've got cap space to be able to do it, and he is going to be giving up cap space every week he misses.
Yeah, the tricky part of the equation is that if he does go to the did not report list, I mean, the Chiefs don't want to make some of those other moves. I mean, there are things that they could do to free up cap space, but a lot of them are bad choices that they don't want to make because in some cases it means committing to some players that are older, that you're basically committing to them for another season without even playing this one out yet. And so that makes it more difficult. It's great that, if they had to put him on the did not report list, they get $19.5 million freed up immediately, which it allows them to do everything that they need, the practice squad for the full 53, anybody on injured reserve, they're fine there. The complication then is when Chris Jones shows up, what do you do? Because after he goes on the did not report list, basically Chris can't come back to the Chiefs without just hosing them without a new deal. I mean, now you have literally locked him into the fact that you have to get that deal done. Or once again, I mean, if Chris shows up, you're going to have to rework a lot of contracts suddenly to squeeze him on. So it's a messy situation.
I talked about this actually on one of my articles on Chiefs Corner, and they can make a move, and they could make a move with Joe Thuney. I think it would free up enough space to be able to do everything. So I think that they'd be okay doing it because if Chris Jones shows up, they still don't have to actually bring him back to the active roster until the next day. So they're going to have a little bit of time. And I think you'd only have to do redo one contract in order to get it done. Now, that does cause issues for 24 and 25 with Thuney. That's a whole nother scenario and something else that's, we're not going to get into here. But I agree with you. I mean, they're not going to want to do that. And maybe they make the move with Thuney before Tuesday or on Tuesday to make sure that they don't have to worry about it when Chris is able to come back or decides he wants to come back. But it does free up cap space, and they would be able to sign, have the other two guys that are going to count against the cap plus their practice squad, because all that is ready to go September 7th.
Yeah, and the difficult thing there, like I said, is that if you rework Joe Thuney's contract, you're essentially committing to Joe Thuney in 24, maybe 25. And, and Joe Thuney's contract was set up with the idea that he was the bridge. He was going to get you through for a couple of seasons, and then after 23, you're supposed to have a younger guy like a Darian Kennard that's going to be able to step into his spot. And if you rework that contract, you're keeping a guy over 30 years old and giving him guaranteed money that the Chiefs really don't want to do. I mean, they don't really want to do that. So, like I said, it's going to create some bad choices for them if Chris does go to the did not report list and then shows up without a new contract.
Yep, I agree. It's tough. I'm curious to see what they're able to do there and what they decide to do. I know that Brett Veach has it already figured out in his mind what he's going to do. No, Mike, I would say we do not care just about the wide receiver position. I think the biggest reason we talked about it so much is because you have a player that is clearly played well enough to make the roster that I just don't think there's room for.
And I mean, for whatever reason, I mean, the 8th wide receiver on this team right now is more popular than the probably 9th defensive lineman on this team. And, it's just the nature of the guys in the trenches, never getting enough attention from me. But
it's also you also look at it, and those guys that you're talking about that are 9, 10, and 11 in the defensive line, it's not a talented group like we talked about earlier. That's not a hard decision because of the talent, because you have a lot of talent there. It's a hard decision because you don't know who you want to keep just because of the way things have played out.
Well, and it's hard because, I mean, there are so many faces that have been rotating in and out of there. The wide receiver group, whereas, I mean, it's pretty delineated. I mean, you can safely say who are the top 8 receivers, and now you're just drawing a line about where's the cut line. With the defensive group, especially at tackle, the Chiefs have been moving Daniel Wise through there, and then Matt Dickerson and Phil Hoskins, and then Chris Williams gets his chance, and now you're trying to where do you fit in Turk Wharton once he comes back? It's a much messier deal, and now that the Chiefs are even looking at trying to find some guys like Malik Herring that can play both. So maybe it's a versatility thing. You're keeping a guy who can play end and tackle. I mean, it's not a clean line. I mean, I can't tell you right now, who were the top 12 defensive linemen in order, and then just draw a clean line about who you're going to cut. I mean, it's much messier than that because one, they haven't figured out a rotation of what is their best line group, who are their best starters. I mean, that's just not, something that they really have right now.
Well, and you're looking at a situation where, Chris Jones obviously makes this defensive line hum and go a lot better, but really, besides Noddy and Keandre Coburn, there's questions on the rest of them. I mean, is Wharton going to be able to play? He played today. Is his knee going to give him issues in the next couple of days to where maybe they'll think about doing IR, which actually leads to this next question with Nick not getting surgery and KT expected back soon. Do we still expect IR after cut down? We talked about Nick a little bit, and you think he's still a potential guy for that. Would it surprise you if Wharton has an issue? Would it surprise you if Wharton ends up on IR?
Like I said, Jones, I'm expecting. With Wharton ending up on IR, it would certainly surprise me. I mean, especially after returning today. Tony ending up on IR would surprise me as well, but I'm less optimistic still about him playing in week 1. Even with Andy Reid saying that there's a chance, I see a lot of people who are thinking there's a chance that he practices as, being that he's likely to come back. And I guess it's just because I've heard Andy Reid say there's a chance that somebody practices, and knowing that usually means that there's still a couple of weeks away.
Yep. I'm
just not expecting it. I mean, I think it's certainly less than 50-50 if Kadarius Toney is there for week 1. And honestly, if it's 50-50, I don't even know why you push it, because with Tony and his injury history, I think you take it easy and you keep make sure that he's 100% before he gets back. And that certainly has been the message from the Chiefs, that they don't want to rush him back. So my feeling is, expectation wise, if you're going to wait until Tony is 100%, he's probably not playing in week 1.
Yeah. And the question is whether or not they think he can be available week 2 or week 3, because that's going to determine whether or not they end up IRing him. And I will say this. I think the Chiefs wide receiver core has enough talent on that receiver core to be able to go through the first couple of games without Tony and be okay. I think Sky Moore's going to have a big year. I mean, we haven't really seen it in the preseason, but I think he's going to have a big year. I think MVS is going to have a better year than he had last year, because Mahomes and him have finally hooked up a little bit on the deeper passes. And then you got other guys in there as well, Justin Watson, Justin Ross. I think those guys are going to be able to help on the wide receiver position. Last quick question, and sorry we've gone way over what we normally do, but there are a ton of questions, and this is a huge deal since Kansas City cuts down in the next couple of days. Why is Jack ahead of Cam? I think Cam should make the roster. Jack Cochran, I think, has solidified his spot. What do you think?
That's a deep cut question, Harry. I appreciate it. Yeah, Jack Cochran. I mean, I think one advantage he's got is that he's a Mike linebacker. He can play inside and he can set the defense. He did that all in the second half today. So that's one thing. Two, Jack, established himself last year as a prime special teams player for Dave Tobe, 4-phase guy. So he's got both those things going for him. Cam Jones has a ton of potential. I mean, there's a lot of athleticism there. He got banged up today, which, I think he did get back into the game. It didn't look like it was anything serious. He should absolutely be a practice squad candidate, and I think they want to have him stick around. But at this point, I think, between the experience, the ability to play middle linebacker, and have, flexibility. I mean, Cochran can play virtually all three of those positions, and the special teams aspect and them not wanting to go super young. I mean, all of that really kind of favors Cochran right now, but I've liked what I've seen from Cam Jones. I like to see him stick around.
I would too. I think that he has an opportunity to help the team in the future. It's going to be really curious to see how things end up turning out. That is going to be it for us today. Thank you all for all of the questions. Thank you for being here. I hope you have enjoyed it. I do think that there are a lot of questions when it comes to the back end of the roster. I think Kansas City could go multiple different ways. Matt and I are both going to have roster predictions out there here in just a little bit. Don't forget, you can text us at 816-357-8781 on the text line. A lot of conversation going on there. Matt, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate it, buddy.
Always a pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Hey, have a good one, you all. We will be back on Monday, unless there's some big news about Chris Jones. We will be back on Monday. Thank you for listening today, and we will talk to you then.